Keisha Morgan stood frozen, her uniform damp with red wine as laughter echoed through the upscale restaurant. Across the table, Miranda Caldwell, draped in designer silk, smirked with cruel satisfaction. "Maybe you're better suited for a job where spilling doesn't matter," she sneered, loud enough for nearby diners to hear. The manager, pale and hesitant, glanced toward the corner table where a distinguished black man silently watched the scene unfold. Without warning, he stood, his calm voice cutting through the tension. "Do you really want to do that? What happens next will change everything. Before we dive into the story, let me know where you're watching from. If you believe in standing up for justice, hit like and subscribe for more powerful stories like this." Keisha Morgan's alarm buzzed at 5:30 in the morning, pulling her from restless sleep. The dim light filtering through the thin curtains of her one-bedroom apartment revealed the cluttered signs of survival, unopened bills stacked on the kitchen counter, a half-empty bottle of children's cough syrup, and a worn calendar with payday circled twice in red. She stretched, wincing at the ache in her lower back after pulling a double shift the night before. There was no time to rest. Her daughter, Maya, needed medication, rent was due in 4 days, and her next paycheck wouldn't stretch far enough. "Mommy, I'm hungry," Maya's small voice called from the next room. Keisha smiled despite her exhaustion. Maya was the reason she kept going. She made a quick breakfast, instant oatmeal and a banana, the last one in the house. As they ate, Maya coughed, a deep raspy sound that made Keisha's heart sink. The asthma medication was running low again, and without insurance, refilling it meant sacrificing groceries. On the way to school, Keisha encountered the first sting of the day. As she waited at the crosswalk, an older white woman clutched her, purse tighter, eyeing Keisha's uniform like it carried a threat. It wasn't the first time. In this part of Atlanta, being black and working class meant being invisible, until someone decided you were a problem. After dropping Maya off, Keisha headed to Blake's Ember, the upscale restaurant where she worked double shifts almost daily. The moment she stepped inside, the atmosphere shifted. The restaurant was a haven for Atlanta's elite, with mahogany tables polished to perfection, crystal chandeliers casting soft golden light, and jazz humming gently through the speakers. But behind the elegance, there was an unspoken hierarchy, and Keisha knew exactly where she stood. The hostess, Madison, a young white woman with sleek blonde hair, barely glanced up. "Oh, you're on early again. Guess some people just love overtime," she muttered, not bothering to hide her disdain. Keisha bit her tongue. She couldn't afford another confrontation, not when she'd already been warned about being too sensitive by her manager. While setting up tables, Keisha noticed a man sitting quietly in the corner. He was sharply dressed in a charcoal suit, sipping coffee and reading what looked like legal documents. He didn't fit the usual profile of the restaurant's patrons. His calm, observant demeanor set him apart. When Keisha passed by with a tray of clean glasses, he looked up and offered a polite nod. She returned the gesture, grateful for the rare moment of civility. By mid-morning, the restaurant buzzed with energy as staff prepared for the busy evening ahead. Keisha moved with practiced efficiency, wiping down surfaces, folding napkins, and ensuring every table was flawless. But beneath her calm exterior, stress churned. The rent, the medication, the exhaustion. It was a fragile balance, and she could feel it teetering. In the back office, her manager, Dennis, a middle-aged white man with thinning hair and a permanent scowl, barked orders into his phone. When Keisha handed him the inventory sheet, he didn't even glance at her. "Make sure you don't mess up tonight. Big crowd coming, high rollers, you screw up, you're on dish duty for a week." Keisha nodded, swallowing her pride. Complaining only made things worse. She'd seen it happen before. Black staff members being written up for minor infractions, while their white counterparts received quiet warnings. It was the way things worked here. Keep your head down. Stay invisible. As the day wore on, Keisha found brief solace in a text from Maya's school. "Field trip tomorrow. Maya is excited." The smile it brought was short-lived. Field trip fees were due today, and Keisha had exactly $23 left in her account. Later, during her short lunch break, she checked job boards on her phone. Most listings required experience she didn't have or promised pay that Wouldn't cover half her expenses. One posting for a catering assistant caught her eye. Temporary but decent pay. She bookmarked it, making a mental note to apply after her shift. By the time the dinner rush began, the restaurant transformed. Soft lighting, hushed conversations, and the clinking of expensive silverware filled the air. Keisha donned her deep blue uniform, smoothing the wrinkles as best she could. It was faded from countless washes, but it was clean, professional. She pushed down her fatigue and plastered on a practiced smile. That's when Miranda Caldwell walked in. Tall, striking, and wrapped in wealth like a second skin, Miranda didn't just enter a room, she commanded it. Her emerald earrings caught the light as she tossed her perfectly highlighted hair over one shoulder, eyes sweeping the restaurant like a queen surveying her court. Two other women trailed behind her, equally polished, but clearly orbiting Miranda's gravitational pull. Keisha's stomach tightened. She'd served women like Miranda before. They didn't see waitstaff. They saw servants, props in the performance of their own importance. She braced herself, forcing her expression into polite neutrality as the hostess led the group to their table. From across the room, Raymond Bennett, the man in the charcoal suit, lowered his coffee cup, eyes narrowing slightly as he watched Miranda glide past. He said nothing, but his gaze lingered on the table where Keisha stood, menu in hand, ready to take their order. The moment Miranda Caldwell settled into her seat, the mood at Blake's Ember subtly shifted. Her laughter, sharp and deliberate, pierced the soft jazz humming through the speakers. Keisha Morgan, menu in hand, approached the table with practiced professionalism, her face a mask of calm despite the unease curling in her stomach. She'd dealt with entitled customers before, but something about Miranda's presence felt heavier, more dangerous, like a storm cloud waiting to burst. Finally, Miranda sighed, glancing at Keisha as though she were an afterthought. I was beginning to think this place had forgotten what service meant. Her friends, Simone and Jenna, exchanged knowing smirks, their diamond bracelets catching the chandelier's light. Keisha kept her smile polite. "Good evening, ladies. Can I start you off with some drinks?" Miranda's gaze swept over Keisha's uniform, pausing on the frayed edge of her sleeve. "Do they not update uniforms here, or is this vintage?" The tone dripped with mockery. Simone chuckled, while Jenna whispered something behind her manicured hand. Keisha's grip tightened on her notepad, but she maintained her composure. "We have a selection of handcrafted cocktails tonight. The peach bourbon smash is quite popular." Miranda waved her hand dismissively. "Just sparkling water with lemon, not lime. Last time they gave me lime and it ruined everything." She leaned closer, voice soft but cutting. "Think you can handle that, sweetheart?" Keisha nodded, biting her tongue. "Yes, ma'am." As she turned toward the bar, she caught Raymond Bennett's gaze from across the room. The man in the charcoal suit. He was watching the table with quiet intensity, his expression unreadable. Keisha blinked, unsure why his attention unsettled her, then hurried to the bar. Behind the counter, the bartender Malik shook his head. "You got the Caldwell table." "Damn, girl, stay strong." "I always do," Keisha muttered, placing the order, but her heart wasn't as steady as her words. Returning with the drinks, Keisha carefully set Miranda's sparkling water down first, the lemon wedge perfectly perched on the rim. She was about to step back when Miranda clicked her tongue, drawing attention like a queen dissatisfied with her court. "This isn't cold enough," Miranda announced, pushing the glass forward. "Do I look like someone who drinks lukewarm water?" Keisha blinked. The glass was frosted, condensation beading down its sides. It was cold, clearly so. But facts didn't matter when someone was determined to assert power. "I'll get you another," Keisha said, reaching for the glass. Miranda pulled it back, a slow smile spreading across her lips. "No need, just more ice, and be quick. We're not here all night," Simone snickered. "Service standards have really dropped since they started hiring just anyone." Keisha swallowed hard and stepped away, her cheeks burning. She could feel eyes on her, not just from Miranda's table but from nearby patrons, who either silently condoned the spectacle or pretended not to notice. Only Raymond Bennett continued to watch with quiet scrutiny. In the kitchen, Keisha exhaled shakily as she refilled the glass with ice. Malik glanced over. "You okay?" "Yeah," Keisha lied. "Just the usual." But it didn't feel like the usual. It felt personal. Back at the table, Keisha placed the new glass down with steady hands. "Here you are, Mom, extra ice." Miranda lifted the glass, inspecting it like a jeweler examining a flawed diamond. "Better," she conceded, sipping delicately. Then, almost as an afterthought, she added, "I hope you're quicker with the entrees, or should we expect delays there too?" Keisha's jaw tightened, but she nodded once and turned away. This wasn't about poor service. It was about dominance, about reminding Keisha of her place in a world where people like Miranda sat comfortably at the top. Across the room, Raymond's gaze followed Keisha as she moved toward the kitchen. His fingers tapped lightly against his coffee cup, a slow, deliberate rhythm. He'd seen encounters like this before, too many times. And he knew one thing for certain: it was far from over. Do you think Keisha should stand up for herself, or is staying quiet the smarter move when her job's on the line? Comment number 1 if you believe she should fight back. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if you believe no one deserves to be treated this way. But what happens when silence is no longer enough? How far will Miranda go to prove her dominance, and what price will Keisha pay for daring to exist in the wrong place, in the wrong uniform, with the wrong skin? The atmosphere at Blake's Ember thickened as the evening wore on. The clink of silverware, murmured conversations, and soft jazz created a polished facade. But at Miranda Caldwell's table, the tension was palpable. Keisha Morgan moved swiftly between tables, her smile intact, but her nerves fraying with every glance toward the corner where Miranda sat like royalty, presiding over her court. Miranda, Simone, and Jenna lounged in their plush chairs, wine glasses, glinting under the chandelier's light. Their laughter rose and fell like waves, each burst punctuated by side-eyed glances toward Keisha. It wasn't just poor service they were hunting for, it was submission. Keisha approached with their entrees. Balancing the tray with practiced precision, she set down Miranda's plate first, a perfectly seared filet mignon resting atop garlic mashed potatoes, steam curling upward like an offering. "There you are, ma'am," Keisha said, her voice steady despite the tightness in her chest. "Medium rare, as requested." Miranda glanced at the plate, then at Keisha, her lips curling into a predatory smile. "Medium rare. This looks closer to well done." She prodded the steak with her fork, though the pink center was unmistakable. Keisha blinked momentarily, caught off guard. "I can have the kitchen fix that if you'd like." Miranda leaned back, her emerald earrings catching the light. "Oh, spare me the apology. Honestly, how hard is it to follow a simple order? Or is attention to detail too much to ask these days?" Simone snickered and Jenna added, "It's not like the job requires a degree." Heat flushed Keisha's cheeks, but she forced her expression into neutrality. "I'll get the chef to prepare another one right away." She reached for the plate, but Miranda pulled it back, her eyes narrowing. "No, leave it. I've lost my appetite anyway." She pushed the plate aside with exaggerated disgust. "It's just sad. Places like this used to have standards." Keisha stood frozen for a moment, weighing her options. Speak up and risk her job? Stay silent and swallow the humiliation? Across the room, Raymond Bennett watched, his expression unreadable but his gaze sharp. Before Keisha could step away, Miranda twisted the knife deeper. "You know," she said, voice loud enough to draw the attention of nearby diners, "this is exactly what happens when businesses start hiring based on quotas instead of qualifications." The words landed like a slap. A couple at the next table exchanged uncomfortable glances, while another diner looked down at her plate, pretending not to hear. The unspoken rule of places like Blake's Ember was clear. Don't interfere. Don't challenge the hierarchy. Keisha's heart pounded in her ears. She wanted to speak, to reclaim the dignity Miranda was so eager to strip away. But then she saw Dennis, the restaurant manager, hovering near the bar. His gaze met hers, and he gave a barely perceptible shake of his head. "Don't make a scene." Keisha swallowed her pride like bitter medicine. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience, Mom," she said quietly. "Let me know if there's anything else I can do." Miranda smiled triumphantly, as though she'd won a game only she was playing. "That's more like it, see? Even people like you can learn their place." Keisha turned away, her vision blurring. In the corner, Raymond's fingers tapped rhythmically against the rim of his glass, his face still impassive. He didn't speak, didn't intervene, just watched. In the kitchen, Keisha leaned against the stainless steel counter, inhaling slowly to steady herself. Malik glanced over, concern flickering across his face. "What happened out there?" Keisha shook her head. Nothing new, but it wasn't nothing. It was another cut, another reminder that no matter how hard she worked, some people would always see her as less. And the worst part? The silence. The complicity of those who saw but chose comfort over confrontation. By the time Keisha returned to the floor, Miranda had moved on, chatting animatedly about her upcoming vacation in Santorini. The plate of untouched steak sat cold on the table, a trophy of her petty victory. Dennis waved Keisha over as she passed by the bar. "You need to be more careful with customers like that," he muttered, his voice low but firm. "Miranda Caldwell spends more in one night than you make in a month. If she complains, it's your job on the line." Keisha stared at him, disbelief tightening her throat. "I didn't do anything wrong." Dennis shrugged. "Doesn't matter. Perception is everything. Just keep your head down and get through the night." As Keisha returned to her rounds, her movements automatic and mechanical, she couldn't shake the feeling of defeat. Not just from Miranda's words, but from the realization that here, in this polished restaurant, filled with wealth and whispered judgments, her worth would always be weighed against the comfort of those who sat at the top. And across the room, Raymond. Bennett continued to watch, his eyes narrowing slightly as Miranda laughed, oblivious to the reckoning quietly brewing in the corner. The hum of conversation and the soft clinking of glasses did little to mask the tension simmering beneath the polished elegance of Blake's Ember. Keisha Morgan moved from table to table, her expression carefully composed, but the humiliation from Miranda Caldwell's words still burned under her skin. She could feel the weight of judgment hanging in the air, not just from Miranda's table, but from the silent onlookers who had witnessed the scene and done nothing. Miranda, meanwhile, lounged in her seat like a queen holding court. She barely touched her meal, too busy recounting stories of luxury vacations and exclusive galas. Her voice, smooth and patronizing, rose just enough for those around her to hear. "And did you see that woman at the last fundraiser?" Miranda laughed, sipping her wine. Wearing last season's Chanel and acting like she belonged. Honestly, some people don't know their place. Keisha's hands tightened around the tray she was carrying, knuckles whitening. The words weren't aimed at her, but they might as well have been. It was always about place, who belonged, who didn't, and who had the power to decide. As she passed by Miranda's table, Keisha's foot barely grazed the corner of a chair. The tray wobbled for a split second, but she caught it, steadying. The glasses with practiced skill. It was nothing, barely a misstep, but Miranda seized the moment like a predator scenting weakness. "Unbelievable," Miranda muttered, loud enough for nearby diners to hear. "Can't even walk without tripping over herself. Is competence really that rare these days?" Keisha froze, the tray balanced in her hands. The restaurant seemed to hold its breath, eyes flickering toward the table, then away again. No one spoke. No one intervened. It was the same script, played out countless times before, but this time something inside Keisha cracked. "I didn't trip," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the heat rising in her chest. "And I'd appreciate it if you didn't. Speak about me like I'm not standing right here." The table fell silent. Miranda's eyes widened in mock surprise, then narrowed into something colder, sharper. Simone and Jenna exchanged amused glances, leaning in as though watching a show unfold. "Oh?" Miranda drawled, her smile tightening. "I didn't realize you were so sensitive. If you can't handle a little feedback, maybe this isn't the right job for you." Keisha stood her ground, heart pounding. Feedback is one thing. Disrespect is another. The words hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. For the first time that evening, Miranda seemed caught off guard. But the surprise lasted only a moment. before her expression hardened into something far more dangerous. "Disrespect?" she repeated slowly, voice dripping with disdain. "Sweetheart, you're lucky to even have this job. People like you should know better than to bite the hand that feeds you." The silence that followed was deafening. Keisha's breath caught, the weight of those words crashing down like a blow. "People like you." The phrase lingered, heavy with implication, stripping away pretense and exposing the raw, ugly truth beneath Miranda's polished exterior. Across the room, Raymond Bennett's hand stilled on his coffee cup. His gaze, sharp and calculating, flickered between Keisha and Miranda. He didn't move, didn't speak. Just watched. Keisha's fingers trembled as she set the tray down on a nearby table, her mind racing. She could walk away, swallow the insult like she'd done so many times before, or she could stand her ground and risk everything. Before she could decide, Miranda leaned in, her smile brittle and triumphant. "Honestly," she said, her voice loud enough to carry across the room, "if this is the best they can hire, no wonder standards have fallen. They'll let just anyone wear that uniform now, won't they?" Laughter erupted from Simone and Jenna, sharp and cruel. Other diners shifted uncomfortably, some whispering behind half-empty wine glasses. No one spoke up. No one ever did. Keisha's vision blurred with unshed tears, but she refused to let them fall. She turned on her heel, heading for the kitchen, her breath ragged in her chest. She barely noticed Raymond's gaze following her, his fingers tapping a slow, deliberate rhythm against the table. Inside the kitchen, Malik looked up from the bar station, concern etching his features. "You good?" he asked quietly. Keisha shook her head, pressing her palms against the cool stainless steel counter. "No," she admitted, voice hoarse. "Not this time." Her shift was far from over, but something had changed. The humiliation, the endless microaggressions, the quiet complicity of those who watched and did nothing. It had reached a breaking point. Silence was no longer enough, but speaking up had only made her a target. As Keisha wiped her face and forced herself back onto the floor, Miranda's eyes met hers, cold and calculating. The smile that curled her lips wasn't just satisfaction. It was a promise, a warning. "You'll regret that." Was Keisha right to stand up for herself even if it risks her job? Comment number 1 if you believe she did the right thing. And don't forget to like, subscribe and share if you think no one should be treated this way. But what happens when speaking up isn't enough? What price will Keisha pay for defying someone like Miranda? And how far will Miranda go to remind her who truly holds the power? Keisha Morgan knew the moment she stepped back onto the restaurant floor that she had crossed an invisible line. Miranda Caldwell sat at her table, legs elegantly crossed, wineglass in hand, the corner of her mouth curled into a satisfied smirk. It wasn't just the look of someone who had won. It was the look of someone who knew the game was rigged in their favor from the start. Keisha kept her head down, refilling water glasses and clearing plates, pretending the knot in her stomach wasn't tightening with every passing minute. But the weight of Miranda's gaze followed her, sharp and deliberate. She was waiting for the right moment to remind Keisha of her place. It didn't take long. "Excuse me," Miranda called out, her voice cutting through the soft hum of conversation. "Can we get some real service here?" Keisha froze for a moment before turning, pasting on the neutral smile she'd perfected over years of customer service. "Yes, ma'am. What can I get for you?" Miranda gestured to her untouched steak. "This is cold. Take it back and try not to ruin it this time." Keisha blinked. The plate had been sitting there for nearly 20 minutes while Miranda gossiped and sipped wine. Of course it was cold. But arguing would only escalate things further. "I'll have the kitchen warm it up," Keisha said quietly, reaching for the plate. Miranda pulled it away, her grin widening. "No need. I'm done with it. I just wanted to see how quickly you'd jump." Simone and Jenna burst into laughter, their perfectly manicured hands covering their mouths in mock surprise. Keisha's cheeks burned, but she refused to give them the satisfaction of a reaction. She turned to leave, focusing on her breathing, on keeping her steps measured and calm. But Miranda wasn't finished. "Actually," she drawled, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "can you send your manager over? I'd like to discuss the quality of service tonight." Keisha's stomach dropped. She glanced toward the bar where Dennis, the restaurant manager, stood chatting with another waiter. His eyes flickered toward Miranda's table, and the moment he saw Keisha standing there, his expression darkened. "Keisha!" Dennis barked, already striding toward them. "What's going on?" Miranda leaned back in her chair, sipping her wine as though the entire encounter were nothing more than entertainment. "I'm just curious," she said, her tone light but her eyes sharp. "Is this really the standard of staff you're employing now? Rude, incompetent, and clearly untrained. I've been coming here for years, and I've never seen the service. Fall this low." Dennis stiffened, his gaze snapping to Keisha. "Is that true? Were you rude to Ms. Caldwell?" Keisha opened her mouth, then closed it, struggling to find words that wouldn't dig the hole deeper. "I wasn't rude," she finally said, voice tight. "I was just trying to do my job." Miranda let out an exaggerated sigh. "See? No. Accountability. This is what happens when you lower the bar." Simone nodded, swirling her wine. "Honestly, I'd expect better from a place like this. It's embarrassing." Dennis didn't wait for an explanation. He crossed his arms, his face hardening into the expression Keisha had come to dread, the one that meant he'd already made up his mind. "Keisha, my office, now!" The walk to the back of the restaurant felt like a march toward execution. Keisha could feel the eyes of other diners on her back, some curious, others smugly indifferent. Only one person didn't look away: Raymond. Bennett, still seated at his corner table, his gaze steady and cold. Inside the cramped office, Dennis shut the door behind them and turned, arms still crossed. "What the hell are you thinking? Picking a fight with a customer? And not just any customer, that's Miranda Caldwell. She practically pays our rent with how often she eats here." Keisha's throat tightened. "I wasn't picking a fight. I was just trying to defend myself. She's been insulting me all night," Dennis scoffed, shaking his head. "Do you hear yourself? This isn't about your feelings, Keisha. It's about the restaurant's reputation. If she leaves a bad review, it hits all of us." Keisha stared at him, disbelief washing over her like cold water. "So what? I'm supposed to let her humiliate me, just smile and take it?" Dennis didn't hesitate. "Yes, that's the job. If you can't handle it, maybe you're in the wrong line of work." The words hit harder than any insult Miranda could have thrown. Keisha had worked here for almost 3 years. Double shifts, extra hours, never calling in sick unless Maya was too ill to be left alone. She had poured everything into keeping this job because it was the only thing standing between her daughter and complete financial collapse. "Look," Dennis said, his tone softening slightly, as if he were doing her a favor. "I'm not firing you, but I'm suspending you for a week, no pay. Take the time to think about whether you really want to be here." Keisha's breath caught. "A week? I can't afford that. I have rent, groceries, my daughter's medication." Dennis held, up a hand cutting her off. "That's not my problem. My problem is keeping customers happy, and right now you're standing in the way of that." The finality in his voice left no room for argument. Keisha stood there, numb, the weight of exhaustion and injustice crashing down on her like a wave. Fighting back had cost her more than her pride. It had cost her security, the fragile stability she'd been clinging to for months. As she left the office, Dennis returned to the floor, his demeanor instantly shifting, back to friendly professionalism as he approached Miranda's table. Keisha didn't wait to hear the conversation. She headed straight for the staff room, grabbed her coat and stepped out into the cold night air. The city lights blurred as tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away, biting her lip until the taste of copper filled her mouth. Crying wouldn't fix anything. It never did. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a text from Maya's babysitter. "Maya coughed a lot tonight. You might want to check her inhaler. It's almost empty." Keisha closed her eyes, the ache in her chest tightening until it was hard to breathe. No paycheck meant no refill. No refill meant another trip to the ER if Maya's asthma flared up again. And that was a bill she couldn't afford to pay. Across. The street lights flickered inside a 24-hour diner. Keisha considered going inside, ordering the cheapest coffee they had and sitting there until she figured out what to do next. But as she turned, movement caught her eye. Raymond Bennett stood on the sidewalk watching her. He hadn't left the restaurant. He didn't smile, didn't wave, just nodded once, as if acknowledging something unspoken. Keisha didn't have the energy to wonder why. She just pulled her coat tighter around herself and walked home, each step heavier than the last. The walk home felt longer than usual. Keisha Morgan hugged her coat tighter against the biting wind, her mind racing with numbers, rent, groceries, Maya's medication. With a full paycheck, she was already juggling bills like a circus act. Without one, the whole act collapsed. Her phone vibrated again. This time it wasn't Maya's babysitter, it was her landlord. "Rent's due in 4 days, no payment, no apartment. I'm done giving extensions." Keisha stopped in her tracks, the cold seeping deeper into her bones. The landlord, Mr. Hendricks, was an older white man who always found a reason to remind Keisha and her neighbors, mostly Black and Latino families, that they were living in his building. Every extension came with condescension. Every conversation carried an undertone of, "Be grateful you're even here." She clenched her jaw and kept walking. 1 week without pay. That was all it took to tip everything into chaos. By the time she reached her apartment, Maya was already asleep, her small chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. The inhaler sat half-used on the nightstand. Keisha stared at it, heart pounding. She needed at least $60 for the refill. The tips she had made earlier barely covered bus fare and a bag of groceries. Collapsing onto the couch, Keisha opened her banking app. $23. That was it. No savings. No backup plan. She scrolled through job listings, hoping for a miracle, but every post either required qualifications she didn't have or promised wages too low to cover childcare. Her stomach twisted as she scrolled past another rejection email. The catering gig she'd applied for last week had already found a more qualified candidate. It was the same pattern. Her resume discarded the moment they saw the gaps, the lack of formal education, the jobs that screamed desperate, not dedicated. The next morning, the real fallout began. Keisha called the pharmacy, hoping to negotiate a partial refill for Maya's inhaler. The pharmacist, an older white woman with the no-nonsense tone of someone who had long stopped caring, barely let her finish. "No insurance, no partials, $64 or we can't fill the prescription." Keisha bit her lip until it bled. "Can you hold it until Friday? I'll have the money by then." There was a pause. "Friday's too long. If you can't pay by tomorrow, we'll restock it." Defeated, Keisha hung up. She stared at her phone, thumb hovering over the borrow button in her banking app. Payday loans, predatory interest rates, the beginning of a cycle she'd barely escaped years ago. But what choice did she have? Maya's health wasn't negotiable. Her decision was made for her when she stepped outside to find an eviction notice taped to her door. Final warning, rent or vacate. Mr. Hendricks stood by the stairs, coffee cup in hand, watching her. Reaction with thinly veiled amusement. "Clock's ticking, Miss Morgan," he said, tipping his cup toward her. "Maybe if you spent less time running your mouth and more time working, you wouldn't be in this mess." Keisha's breath caught. The jab wasn't just about rent. It was about Blake's Ember, about how word traveled fast in places like this. Her suspension wasn't a secret anymore. She wanted to scream, to cry, to fight back. But what was the point? She was outnumbered, outpowered, out of options. Desperate, Keisha called the restaurant's HR office, hoping Dennis might reconsider. Maybe she could work the weekend shifts, make up the hours somehow. The phone rang twice before a curt voice answered. "This is Marcia, HR." Keisha swallowed hard. "Hi, this is Keisha Morgan. I'm on suspension, but I wanted to see if there's any way I could—" Marcia cut her off. "Hold on." Muffled voices filtered through the line. Then, "Sorry, Keisha, but your suspension stands. And for the record, there's now a note on your file about insubordination. That means no overtime. Requests for the next quarter." Keisha's blood ran cold. "Insubordination? I didn't—" "It's already logged. Look, I suggest you take this time to reflect. Attitude matters here." The line clicked dead. Keisha stared at the phone, disbelief flooding her system. A suspension was one thing, but a formal mark of insubordination? That wasn't just a punishment. It was a scarlet letter. It meant fewer shifts, fewer opportunities, and a reputation that would follow her to every future job interview, and all because she dared to stand up for herself. Her hands shook as she set the phone down. Across the room, Maya coughed in her sleep, the sound jagged and strained. Keisha closed her eyes, the weight of failure pressing down until it was hard to breathe. That evening, Keisha made one last attempt. She pulled on her coat and walked 2 miles to the corner store that sometimes let her cash tips early. The owner, Mr. Patel, usually helped when he could, but tonight his face was tight with apology. As she stepped back onto the street, the weight of the day crushed her resolve. She had stood her ground, demanded respect, refused to be treated like less, and in return, she'd lost everything. No job, no rent money, no inhaler for Maya. And the worst part? Miranda Caldwell had walked away untouched, sipping wine and laughing with her friends, never once considering the destruction left in her wake. Do you think it's fair that standing up for herself cost Keisha everything? Comment number 1 if you believe she deserved better. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if you think no one should lose their livelihood for defending their dignity. But what happens when someone has nothing left to lose? How far? Will Keisha go to protect her daughter, her home, and her future? And who's really watching, quietly waiting for the right moment to step in? The next morning, Keisha Morgan woke to the sound of Maya coughing, the rasping noise echoing through their small apartment like an alarm bell. Panic surged through her as she rushed to Maya's bedside. Her daughter's face was flushed, her little chest rising and falling far too quickly. "Mama, I can't breathe," Maya wheezed, clutching her inhaler. It was almost empty. Keisha's heart pounded. There was no time to think. She scooped Maya into her arms, grabbed her coat and bolted out the door, ignoring the eviction notice still fluttering against the peeling paint of their apartment door. The ER was a blur of fluorescent lights and cold impersonal efficiency. Nurses moved past her without a glance, their focus on charts and beeping monitors. Keisha stood at the front desk, shifting Maya's weight on her hip while the receptionist, an older white woman with reading glasses perched on her nose, barely looked up. "Insurance card?" the woman asked, her tone flat. I don't have insurance," Keisha admitted, breathless. "But my daughter's having an asthma attack. Please, just..." The receptionist sighed, already turning the clipboard toward her. "Cash payment, then. Minimum deposit of $200 before we can admit her. Otherwise, you'll need to go to a county clinic." Keisha's mind blanked. "200? I don't... She needs help now." The woman didn't flinch. "Policy's policy, ma'am." Maya coughed harder, her tiny fingers clutching Keisha's coat. Desperation clawed at Keisha's throat. She opened her purse, yanking out crumpled bills and loose change, everything she had left. $37 and some coins. It wasn't enough. It wasn't even close. "I'll pay the rest," came a calm, authoritative voice from behind her. Keisha turned, stunned to see Raymond Bennett standing there, his charcoal suit crisp despite the early hour. He didn't meet her eyes, instead, focusing on the receptionist as he slid a black credit card across the counter. "Charge whatever's necessary. Admit the child," he said simply. The receptionist blinked, suddenly more attentive. "Of course, sir. Right away." Keisha stood, frozen, clutching Maya tightly. Why would you do that?" Raymond glanced at her, expression unreadable. "Because I can." He nodded toward Maya. "Get her the care she needs." Before Keisha could form a response, a nurse appeared with a wheelchair, gently easing Maya into it. "We'll take it from here, ma'am," the nurse said, pushing Maya down the hallway toward the treatment rooms. Keisha hesitated for a moment, torn between following her daughter and confronting the man who had appeared once, again like a ghost at the edge of her worst moments. When she turned back, Raymond was already walking away, his long strides purposeful. She wanted to call out, to ask him why he kept showing up, but the words died in her throat. There were more urgent matters at hand. She hurried after the nurse. pushing down the gnawing questions swirling in her mind. Hours later, after Maya had been stabilized, Keisha sat by her daughter's hospital bed, exhaustion pressing down on her like a weight. The attending physician, a middle-aged black woman with tired eyes, approached quietly. "Your daughter will be fine, but she'll need consistent medication and regular checkups. Are you sure you can manage that?" Keisha forced a smile, though the lie tasted bitter. "Yes, of course, thank you." The doctor nodded but didn't look convinced. She glanced toward the door. "That man who paid, he left this for you." She handed Keisha a small envelope. Keisha opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a receipt for the hospital deposit, marked paid in full, and a business card with a handwritten note on the back. "No child should suffer because of someone else's cruelty. RB." Keisha stared at the initials, her mind racing. Who was Raymond Bennett, really? Why was he watching her life unravel like a spectator at a tragedy? And why was he stepping in at the exact moment she was about to hit rock bottom? But she didn't have time to dwell. Maya stirred in the hospital bed, her breathing finally even, her face peaceful. Keisha leaned down and kissed her forehead, silently vowing that no matter how hard it got, she wouldn't let anyone, not Miranda, not Dennis, not the system itself, take away what little security they had left. That night, as Maya slept, and the beeping monitors filled the room with their mechanical rhythm, Keisha scrolled through job postings once more. Nothing. Rejections piled up in her email inbox, each one another nail in the coffin of hope. Until she saw it, an email from Stellar Catering, a local company that often worked high-profile private events. "We need extra hands for a private estate dinner this weekend. Short-term gig, premium pay. Interested?" Keisha's fingers hovered over the reply button. It wasn't stable work, it wouldn't fix everything, but it was something. And after the past few days, something felt like survival. She typed back quickly, "Yes, I'll take it. When and where?" As she hit send, a small flicker of hope sparked in her chest. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that the estate hosting the event belonged to none other than Raymond Bennett. And across town, in a high-rise office overlooking the glittering lights of Atlanta, Raymond sat behind a sleek mahogany desk, reviewing guest lists and final details for the upcoming event. His eyes lingered on one name in particular, Keisha Morgan. He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers beneath his chin. The pieces were moving into place. The real game was about to begin. 2 days after Maya's hospital visit, Keisha Morgan stood outside an iron gate so tall it seemed to scrape the sky. Beyond it stretched a winding driveway lined with manicured hedges, leading to a sprawling estate that looked more like a five-star resort than a private home. Her phone buzzed with a text from the catering company. "Event location confirmed. Check in with the head of staff at the east entrance." Keisha clutched her coat tighter, nerves prickling beneath her skin. The gig was temporary, one night of serving hors d'oeuvres and champagne to Atlanta's elite. But the paycheck promised to cover Maya's medication and, if she stretched it, part of the rent. It wasn't stability, but it was survival. She walked toward the side entrance. Keisha couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong here. Grand homes like this were built to keep people like her out. Yet here she was, wearing the same crisp uniform she'd worn at Blake's Ember, freshly ironed to hide the wear of too many washes. A sharply dressed woman with a clipboard stood by. The entrance, eyes flicking up and down as Keisha approached. "Name?" the woman asked briskly. "Keisha Morgan. I'm with Stellar Catering." The woman checked her list, nodded, and handed Keisha a black apron. "You're on tray service tonight. Canapés, champagne refills, light cleanup. Do not engage with guests unless spoken to first. And for God's sake, don't hover." Keisha nodded, biting back the urge to remind her that she'd done this job long enough to know the rules. She was here to work, not make friends, and definitely not to attract attention. Inside, the estate was even more lavish than it looked from the gate. Marble floors gleamed under chandeliers the size of small cars. Art pieces that probably cost more than Keisha's annual rent hung on the walls, each one spotlighted like a museum exhibit. Staff moved like shadows, silent and efficient, while florists fussed over the final placement of blood-red roses along the grand dining table. As Keisha adjusted her apron, she caught sight of the catering lead, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and an expression that screamed no nonsense. "You," he barked, pointing at her. "Start with the West Wing. Guests will filter through for cocktails before dinner. Keep the trays full and your head down." Keisha grabbed a silver tray laden with champagne flutes and stepped into the West Wing, her mind focused solely on the paycheck waiting at the end of the night. She didn't notice the man standing near the grand piano until she was nearly beside him. Keisha. Her breath caught. It was Raymond Bennett. He wasn't in his usual charcoal suit. Tonight, he wore a tailored midnight blue tuxedo, the kind that didn't just speak of wealth but old wealth, the kind passed down through generations. He held a glass of bourbon, untouched, his sharp gaze locking onto her like a spotlight. "What are you doing here?" Keisha blurted before she could stop herself, nearly upsetting the tray in her hands. Raymond's lips curled into the faintest smile. "I could ask you the same." I'm working," Keisha stammered, cheeks flushing. "Just a catering gig. Didn't realize it was your event." "Not just an event," Raymond said, gesturing around the grand room. "This estate belongs to me." Keisha froze. The marble floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Raymond Bennett owned all this. The man who had quietly covered her daughter's hospital bill, who had watched her humiliation at Blake's Ember without intervening, was standing in front of her like the final piece of a puzzle snapping into place. "I don't understand," Keisha murmured. "Why help me? Why now?" Raymond's gaze softened, but his voice remained steady. "Because I've seen people like Miranda Caldwell destroy lives while hiding behind privilege. I've been on the other side of that power dynamic, and I know how it feels to fight a battle you can't win because the system was never built for you." Keisha blinked, struggling to process his words. "But you did win. Look at all this." She gestured to the opulence surrounding them. Raymond's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Winning doesn't erase the scars. It just gives you the choice to look away or to step in when someone else is being pushed down." Before Keisha could respond, the catering lead barked her name from across the room. "Morgan!" "Less chatting, more serving. Move." Keisha swallowed hard, gripping the tray tighter. She glanced back at Raymond. "Thank you. For the hospital bill. For everything." He nodded once. "Finish your shift. We'll talk after." Keisha returned to her rounds, mind spinning. The weight of exhaustion and defeat she'd carried for days now mixed with confusion, hope, and something dangerously close to trust. Why had Raymond chosen her to help? And what exactly did he want in return? Do you think Raymond is genuinely trying to help Keisha, or is there something more to his intentions? Comment number 1 if you believe he's sincere, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if you think everyone deserves a chance to rise above injustice. But what happens when Keisha's chance at redemption puts her face to face with the very person who tore her down? How will she handle the moment when past humiliation collides with present opportunity? The evening unfolded like a scene from a luxury magazine. Crystal chandeliers bathed the grand hall in golden light, while soft classical music floated through the air. Guests in designer gowns and tailored suits glided across the polished marble floors, sipping champagne and exchanging meaningless pleasantries. For them, this was just another glamorous night. For Keisha Morgan, it was survival wrapped in silk and privilege. Keisha moved quietly through the crowd, balancing her tray of champagne flutes with practiced ease. She kept her head down, avoiding eye contact, focusing only on the hours ahead. Work the shift, collect the paycheck, refill Maya's medication, and maybe, just maybe, buy enough time to figure out the rest. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. As she turned toward the main dining area, Keisha froze. There, standing near the bar, was Miranda Caldwell, the same Miranda who had humiliated her at Blake's Ember, the same woman whose complaints had cost Keisha her job and nearly her home. Draped in an emerald green gown that matched her sharp eyes, Miranda held court like royalty, a glass of champagne in one hand and an amused smile curling her lips. Keisha's breath caught in her throat. Of all the people, Miranda hadn't seen her yet. Keisha could turn around, ask to switch sections, anything to avoid another encounter. But before she could move, Miranda's gaze swept the room and landed directly on her. For a moment, Miranda's expression flickered with surprise. Then recognition dawned, followed by something colder, sharper: satisfaction. Well, well, Miranda drawled, stepping closer with the predatory grace of a lioness cornering prey. Look who's back where she belongs. Keisha stiffened, forcing a polite smile. Good evening, ma'am. Can I offer you some champagne? Miranda's smile widened, dripping with false sweetness. Champagne? How fitting. From serving steaks to serving drinks, I guess they finally put you in a job you can't mess up. Simone and Jenna, Miranda's ever-present entourage, appeared at her side, both eyeing Keisha with the same thinly veiled amusement. Simone leaned in, whispering loudly enough for Keisha to hear. Didn't she get fired? How desperate do you have to be to crawl back into this kind of work? Keisha swallowed hard, her grip tightening on the tray. She wanted to walk away, to escape the trap Miranda was so clearly setting, but the catering lead had made it clear, do not engage with guests unless spoken to first, and Miranda was speaking, loudly. I'm just here to do my job, Keisha said quietly, keeping her voice steady. If you'll excuse me. But Miranda wasn't finished. Do your job? She sneered, stepping directly into Keisha's path. That's rich. You couldn't even handle waiting tables without an attitude. I'm surprised they trusted you not to spill drinks on the guests. Simone laughed, swirling her wine. Maybe that's why she's still here. Can't get hired. Anywhere else? The room seemed to shrink, the glittering elegance collapsing inward as Keisha stood there, heart pounding, humiliation burning through her veins. She glanced around, searching for an escape, but no one intervened. Just like before, the wealthy guests either ignored the scene or watched with detached curiosity, entertained by the power imbalance playing out in real time. And standing near the far end of the room, Raymond Bennett watched, his face unreadable. Keisha took a deep breath. Stay calm. Get through the night. Don't let her win. I'm sorry you feel that way, Mom, she said quietly. Enjoy the event. Turning sharply, she stepped past Miranda, her tray still balanced perfectly, but Miranda's voice followed her, sharp and cutting. Careful now, one mistake, and you'll be right back where you started, or worse. Keisha's stomach twisted, but she didn't look back. She couldn't afford to. For the next hour, she moved through the crowd like a shadow, avoiding Miranda's line of sight, keeping her focus on the task at hand. But the tension lingered, coiling tighter, with every passing minute. She could feel Miranda's gaze following her, like a predator toying with its prey. It wasn't until Keisha stepped into the kitchen for a quick break that the real blow landed. Keisha! The catering lead barked, storming toward her with fury etched across his face. Security just flagged you. One of the guests reported you for theft. Keisha blinked, stunned. Theft? What are you talking about? I didn't... He held up a small velvet pouch, the kind used for jewelry or luxury items. This was found near the bar, stuffed under one of the catering carts. Guest says it was missing from her purse. Security checked, and guess what? You were the last server near that table. Keisha's heart dropped into her stomach. No, this can't be happening. I didn't steal anything, she protested, voice rising with panic. I've been on the floor all night, checked the cameras, but the catering lead cut her off, shaking his head. Save it. This is a private estate. They don't need proof to kick you out. Either you leave quietly or security escorts you out. Your choice. Keisha stood there, speechless, the room spinning around her. It didn't take a genius to piece it together. Miranda, of course it was Miranda. This wasn't about theft. It was about power, about crushing someone who had dared to challenge her even once. And the worst part? It was working. Silent tears burned the back of Keisha's eyes as she unfastened her apron and handed it over. I didn't take anything, she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. The catering lead didn't respond. He just waved her toward the back exit, already moving on to the next crisis. To him, Keisha was nothing more than another disposable worker, easily replaced and quickly forgotten. As she stepped out into the cold night air, the estate lights glittering behind her like distant stars, Keisha felt the last shreds of hope slip through her fingers. She had fought so hard to rise above, to survive, to protect Maya, and once again the weight of privilege and prejudice had crushed her beneath its heel. Across the street, parked beneath a shadowy oak tree, a sleek, black car idled quietly. Inside, Raymond Bennett watched as Keisha stood on the curb, hugging herself against the chill, her face etched with defeat. His jaw tightened. He had expected cruelty from Miranda, but this was calculated, personal, and it was the final straw. Without hesitation, Raymond reached for his phone. The game had changed, and this time the board belonged to him. Keisha Morgan stood on the curb outside the grand estate, the cold night air biting through her thin coat. Her hands trembled, not from the chill, but from the weight of humiliation pressing down on her chest. She had done everything right, worked hard, stayed quiet, avoided confrontation, and still she was standing here, cast out like trash over a crime she didn't commit. The velvet pouch, the accusation of theft. It was so absurd, so blatantly false, that it almost felt like a cruel joke. But Miranda Caldwell didn't joke, she destroyed. And tonight, she had won again. Keisha wiped at her eyes, furious with herself for letting the tears fall. Crying wouldn't change the fact that she was jobless, paycheckless, and now branded as a thief. Word would spread, just like it had after Blake's Ember. The catering company wouldn't hire her again. Other agencies would hear the whispers. Don't hire her. She's trouble. The ache in her chest deepened as she thought of Maya, sleeping peacefully back at the apartment, blissfully unaware that her mother had just lost another chance to keep their world from falling apart. Keisha clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms. Enough. She was tired of being powerless, tired of swallowing injustice like bitter medicine. Footsteps echoed behind her. Keisha stiffened, turning slowly to see Raymond Bennett approaching from the estate's side entrance. His expression was darker than she'd ever seen, calculated, controlled, but with a simmering fury just beneath the surface. "Keisha," he said quietly, stopping a few feet away. "What happened?" Keisha let out a hollow laugh, shaking her head. "What happened? Miranda Caldwell happened. Again. She planted that pouch. I know it. You know it. But none of that matters, does it? Because people like her always win." Raymond's jaw tightened. "Not tonight." Before Keisha could process his words, he held up his phone, the screen glowing with a paused video. Security footage. The camera angle was sharp and clear, focused on the bar area where Miranda had been standing earlier in the evening. Keisha leaned in, heart pounding. The footage showed Miranda laughing with Simone and Jenna, casually sipping her champagne. Then, with practiced ease, she slipped the velvet pouch from her clutch and tucked it beneath the catering cart stationed near the bar. The entire move took less than 3 seconds. So quick, so smooth, it was almost impressive in its precision. Keisha's breath caught. How did you get this?" Raymond's eyes didn't leave hers. "It's my estate. My event. Every corner of this house is monitored inside and out." He tucked the phone back into his pocket. "Miranda didn't just cross a line tonight. She obliterated it." Keisha stared at him, disbelief warring with cautious hope. "So what now? Are you going to confront her? Have security throw her out?" The idea was tempting. God, it was tempting. But a cynical part of her whispered that people like Miranda didn't face consequences. They walked away, untouched and unbothered, while people like Keisha picked up the shattered pieces. Raymond's lips pressed into a thin line. No, throwing her out would make a scene, but it wouldn't teach her anything. People like Miranda don't understand loss until it's personal. Keisha frowned. What does that mean? Raymond didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled out another phone, sleek, businesslike, and typed a quick message. Within seconds, 2 figures emerged from the side entrance, the head of estate security and the catering lead who had escorted Keisha out. The catering lead looked sheepish, his earlier bravado gone. "Mr. Bennett, I didn't know. If I'd seen the footage earlier—" "Stop," Raymond said curtly. "You didn't ask for proof. You took one woman's word and threw an innocent employee out into the cold without a second thought. That tells me everything I need to know about how you run your operation." The man's face paled. "Sir, please, this was a misunderstanding." "It was negligence," Raymond interrupted, voice like ice. "And negligence doesn't work in my house. You're done here. Collect your team and leave." The man opened, his mouth to protest, but caught the steel in Raymond's gaze and thought better of it. Shoulders slumping, he nodded once and hurried back inside, the weight of dismissal hanging heavy over him. Keisha watched, stunned. "You didn't have to do that?" "Yes," Raymond said quietly. "I did." The head of security stepped forward next, holding a sleek black tablet. "The footage is saved, sir. What do you want us to do?" Raymond's gaze hardened. "Send a copy to Miranda's personal email and her corporate account. Include the subject line, 'Consider this your final warning.'" Keisha blinked. "Her corporate account?" Raymond nodded, eyes cold. "Miranda sits on the board of Caldwell Holdings. It's a family-run investment firm, but they pride themselves on their inclusive leadership values. This footage, it's more than just an embarrassment. It's a liability." Realization dawned, sharp and satisfying. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about power. The kind Miranda had wielded so effortlessly against Keisha now turned back on her like a mirror reflecting the ugliest parts of her soul. "She'll retaliate," Keisha said quietly, half warning, half question. Raymond's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Let her. People like Miranda thrive on unchecked power. The moment they face real consequences, they crumble." He glanced toward the glowing lights of the estate. "Tonight she learns that money can't buy immunity. Not here, not anymore." For the first time in days, Keisha felt the crushing weight on her chest ease, just a little. It wasn't full justice. Nothing could erase the damage Miranda had done, but it was something. A crack in the armor of invincibility that people like Miranda wore so confidently. Raymond turned back to Keisha, his expression softening. "Come inside, finish your shift. You deserve your paycheck." Keisha hesitated, the instinct to cut her losses and run warring with the quiet urge to reclaim what had been taken from her. Finally, she nodded. "Okay." Together, they walked back toward the grand entrance side by side. And this time, when Keisha crossed the threshold, she didn't feel like an outsider begging for scraps. She felt like someone who belonged, someone who had survived the storm and was finally stepping into her own power. The atmosphere inside the estate had shifted. The hum of polite conversation, the clinking of crystal glasses, the soft notes of classical music, all of it seemed quieter, subdued, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Keisha Morgan walked back inside alongside Raymond Bennett, her heart pounding with a strange mix of relief and apprehension. She had expected to leave this place in disgrace. Now she was walking back into the lion's den with her head held high. Raymond didn't speak as they crossed the grand hall, his expression calm but calculating. He had moved his pieces carefully, like a chess master seeing 10 moves ahead. And now, it was time for the final play. Keisha returned to her station, near the west wing, grabbing a tray of champagne flutes with steady hands. She could feel the curious glances of other staff members, some surprised to see her back after the earlier spectacle, others quickly averting their eyes, unwilling to get involved. It didn't matter. Keisha wasn't here for their approval. Across the room, Miranda Caldwell stood near the bar, still holding court with Simone and Jenna, blissfully unaware of the storm heading her way. She laughed, swirling the last sip of her champagne as she recounted some vacation anecdote, her voice effortlessly dominating the space around her. Keisha's chest tightened. How many lives had Miranda trampled underfoot without a second thought? How many times had she walked away, victorious and untouchable, while someone else picked up the broken pieces? Not tonight. The first ripple of change came when the head of security re-entered the room, his gaze sweeping the crowd before settling on Raymond. He gave a discreet nod, barely noticeable to anyone not paying attention, but Keisha saw it. And so did Raymond. "Showtime," Raymond muttered under his breath, stepping away from Keisha and toward the center of the room. The music faded as Raymond raised a hand, commanding attention without uttering a word. Conversations died down, guests turning toward him with curious expressions. Even the catering staff paused, sensing something unusual. "Ladies and gentlemen," Raymond began, his voice smooth but firm, carrying easily across the room. "I hope you're all enjoying the evening. It's always a pleasure to host such distinguished company." He smiled, the warmth in his expression not quite reaching his eyes. "But before we continue, there's a matter that needs to be addressed." Miranda, mid-sip, froze. Her eyes narrowed, suspicion flickering across her perfectly made-up face. Simone and Jenna exchanged confused glances, their laughter dying on their lips. Raymond gestured to the head of security, who stepped forward, holding the sleek black tablet displaying the damning footage. "A theft was reported earlier this evening," Raymond continued, his tone sharpening. "A serious accusation that, had it gone unchecked, would have cost an innocent person their livelihood. Fortunately, this estate is well monitored, and the truth has a way of revealing itself." The tablet's screen lit up, casting a soft glow as the footage played. The room fell deathly silent as Miranda's actions unfolded in crystal-clear detail. The casual sip of champagne, the quick glance around, the smooth slip of the velvet pouch beneath the catering cart. It was undeniable, indisputable. Keisha watched Miranda's face closely. The transformation was almost poetic. The smug confidence drained away, replaced first by confusion, then dawning horror. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. For once, Miranda Caldwell was speechless. "Ms. Caldwell," Raymond said, voice cool and authoritative, "do you have an explanation for this?" Miranda blinked rapidly, color draining from her cheeks. "This is ridiculous," she sputtered, forcing a brittle laugh. "That video, it's clearly edited. I would never—" "Careful," Raymond interrupted, holding up a hand. "Accusing me of doctoring evidence would be a bold claim, especially when multiple security feeds corroborate the same story." Simone took a step back, distancing herself from Miranda, as if physical space could absolve her of guilt by association. Jenna, ever the opportunist, quietly slipped her phone from her clutch, likely already texting someone about the scandal unfolding in real time. "I should have you removed immediately," Raymond continued, his gaze steady. "But that would be too easy, wouldn't it? You'd walk away, spin a new narrative, and convince yourself you were the victim. No accountability, no consequences." Miranda's eyes darted around the room, searching for allies. None emerged. The other guests, once eager to bask in her orbit, now watched with expressions ranging from shock to barely concealed schadenfreude. The social hierarchy was shifting, and everyone could feel it. Raymond stepped closer, his voice dropping just enough to make the next words cut deeper. "Instead, I've sent the footage directly to Caldwell Holdings, your father's company, if I'm not mistaken. The one that prides itself on ethical leadership and community values." Miranda's breath hitched. "You wouldn't." "I already did," Raymond replied smoothly. "By now, every board member has seen it, including your father. I imagine he'll have questions about how his daughter's behavior reflects on the family brand." The weight of those words seemed to physically stagger Miranda. Her carefully constructed facade cracked, the mask of superiority slipping to reveal something raw and desperate beneath. "Raymond, please," she hissed, her voice low but urgent. This is overkill. It was a joke, a stupid misunderstanding. Don't ruin my life over it." Keisha stood silently, heart pounding as she watched the woman who had once belittled her without consequence, now reduced to pleading. It should have felt satisfying, victorious, but instead it felt hollow. No amount of public humiliation would undo the damage Miranda had already caused, not just to Keisha, but to countless others who didn't have a Raymond Bennett watching. "They're back." Raymond seemed to sense Keisha's conflicted thoughts. He turned slightly, catching her eye, then looked back at Miranda. "Ruin your life," he echoed, voice laced with quiet fury. "You didn't think twice about ruining hers." The room's attention shifted, following Raymond's gaze to Keisha. She stood tall, the weight of shame and defeat she'd carried for days lifting piece by piece. For the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't invisible. She was seen, heard, believed. Miranda's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of her. She knew it was over. Without another word, she turned on her heel and stormed toward the exit, heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. No one stopped her. No one followed. As the doors swung shut behind her, the silence lingered for a beat longer before Raymond cleared his throat, resetting the mood with practiced ease. "Well," he said lightly, "I believe that concludes the evening's entertainment. Please enjoy the rest of your night." The music swelled once more, conversations hesitantly resuming as guests processed what they'd just witnessed. Some whispered in hushed tones, others avoided eye contact entirely, unwilling to confront the uncomfortable reality of what power unchecked could lead to. Raymond turned back to Keisha, expression softening. "Are you all right?" Keisha exhaled, slowly, nodding. "Yeah, I think I am." "Good." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a sealed envelope. "Your pay for the night, full amount, and a little extra for the trouble." Keisha hesitated, then accepted the envelope, fingers brushing against the crisp paper. It wasn't just money, it was dignity restored. Proof that standing tall, even when the world tried to break her down, hadn't been in vain. As the night wore on and the estate emptied, Keisha found herself standing near the grand entrance, watching as luxury cars pulled away one by one. The world outside hadn't changed. Injustice still existed, privilege still reigned. But tonight, for once, the scales had tipped in favor of the underdog. Raymond joined her, hands in his pockets, gaze thoughtful. "You know," he said quietly, "this doesn't have to be the end of the road. If you're interested, I have a position open in my hospitality division. Management track, full benefits, no glass ceilings." Keisha's breath caught. The offer was more than generous. It was life-changing. But it wasn't charity. It was recognition of worth long overlooked. She smiled, extending her hand. "I'm interested." Raymond shook her hand firmly, sealing the deal. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Morgan." As Keisha stepped out into the cool night air, the weight on her shoulders finally lifted. She had walked into this estate as a woman beaten down by circumstance. She walked out as someone who had reclaimed her power, her dignity, and her future. The fight wasn't over. It never truly was. But tonight, at least, justice had won. And for the first time in a long while, Keisha believed that better days were finally within reach. The following morning, sunlight streamed through the thin curtains of Keisha Morgan's apartment, casting a warm glow on the small space she shared with Maya. For the first time in weeks, Keisha woke up without the crushing weight of dread pressing down on her chest. She stretched, muscles still sore from the long shift at the estate, but there was something different in her heart, peace. Maya stirred beside her, letting out a soft yawn. "Mommy?" she murmured sleepily. "Do you have to work today?" Keisha smiled, brushing a curl from her daughter's forehead. "Not today, baby. We've got the whole day together." The words felt foreign on her tongue, but liberating. No scrambling between shifts, no begging for overtime, no racing against eviction notices and empty inhalers. Just time. Precious, uninterrupted time. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A message from Raymond Bennett. "HR will send over your onboarding paperwork today. Take your time. Your first official day is next Monday. Congratulations, Keisha. You earned this." Keisha stared at the screen, disbelief washing over her once again. A real job. Full benefits. A management track. It wasn't just employment. It was security. It was freedom from the relentless cycle she had been trapped in for so long. She set the phone down, eyes stinging with gratitude. Later that afternoon, while Maya napped, Keisha sat at the kitchen table, paying bills with the check Raymond had handed her the night before. Rent covered, utilities covered, and the best part? A full refill of Maya's asthma medication, no corners cut, no begging the pharmacist for a discount. For once, survival didn't feel like an impossible climb, but Keisha wasn't the only one feeling the ripple effects of the previous night. Across town, in a glass-walled boardroom overlooking Atlanta's skyline, the board members of Caldwell Holdings convened for an emergency meeting. The footage Raymond had sent wasn't just damning, it was a PR nightmare. The daughter of one of the firm's founding members, caught fabricating theft to humiliate a working-class black woman. It was the kind of scandal that could unravel decades of carefully cultivated image building. Miranda Caldwell sat at the far end of the long mahogany table, her complexion pale despite the flawless makeup she always wore. Her father, a stern man with silver hair and an unforgiving gaze, watched the footage play out once more on the conference room's large screen. "Explain this," he demanded, voice cold and clipped. Miranda's lips parted, but no words came. There was no defense, no plausible excuse. The evidence was irrefutable, and worse, it had already begun spreading beyond corporate walls. Social media buzzed with whispers, a leaked clip, an anonymous post questioning whether Caldwell Holdings truly stood by its inclusive values. Investors had called that morning, uneasy and probing. Her father sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. "You've embarrassed this family, tarnished our name. Effective immediately, you're stepping down from any public-facing role. And if you think you're inheriting a seat on this board after I'm gone, think again." Miranda blinked, stunned. "Dad, you can't be serious." "I've never been more serious," he snapped. "You didn't just humiliate a woman trying to earn an honest living. You exposed our company to liability. If Raymond Bennett had gone public instead of keeping this internal, we'd be bleeding clients right now." Silence filled the room, thick and suffocating. Miranda sat frozen, the weight of consequence finally crashing down in a way it never had before. Privilege had shielded her for years, but now it was cracking, piece by piece. Meanwhile, at Blake's Ember, another reckoning unfolded. Dennis, the restaurant manager, who had so quickly sided with Miranda's complaints and suspended Keisha without proof, found himself facing an uncomfortable reality. Raymond had quietly reached out to the restaurant's owner, an old acquaintance. From business circles sharing the full story. Within hours, an internal review was launched, and multiple complaints against Dennis from minority staff members resurfaced, complaints that had conveniently been swept under the rug until now. By the end of the week, Dennis was gone. His name quietly removed from the employee roster, his office emptied without ceremony. Blake's Ember, eager to save face, issued a statement about reaffirming their commitment to diversity, equity, and respect in the workplace. Keisha heard about it through Malik, the bartender, who sent her a laughing emoji followed by, "Karma finally clocked in." But Keisha wasn't dwelling on the past. She had a future to build. The following Monday, she walked into the sleek downtown office of Bennett Hospitality Group. Dressed in a crisp blouse and tailored slacks Raymond had quietly covered after her interview. The receptionist greeted her warmly, already knowing her name. No one looked through her. No one dismissed her presence. For the first time in her professional life, Keisha felt like she belonged. Raymond met her near the conference room, offering a rare, genuine smile. "Ready for your first day?" "Miss Morgan," Keisha smiled back, standing taller than she ever had. "More than ready." The days that followed weren't perfect. Life never was. There were still bills to pay, challenges to face, moments of doubt, but there was also stability, health insurance, a paycheck that didn't evaporate the moment it hit her account. And, most importantly, the knowledge that she had faced the worst the world could throw at her and had come out stronger. One evening, as she tucked Maya into bed, the little girl blinked up at her sleepily. "Mommy, are we okay now?" Keisha brushed a curl from Maya's forehead, heart swelling. "Yeah, baby, we're more than okay." Across town, Raymond sat in his office, reviewing proposals for a new community initiative aimed at supporting marginalized workers in the hospitality industry. Keisha's idea. He glanced at his phone, the screen lighting up with a news alert. Prominent socialite Miranda Caldwell resigns from board amidst scandal. He didn't smile, didn't gloat. Justice wasn't about vengeance. It was about balance, about reminding. The world that power, when wielded responsibly, could uplift rather than destroy. Keisha Morgan had fought for her dignity and won. And in doing so, she hadn't just changed her own life. She'd shifted the tide, proving that no matter how steep the climb, resilience and integrity could rewrite the narrative. As the city lights blinked to life beyond Raymond's window, he leaned back in his chair, satisfied. The world hadn't changed overnight, but for one woman, one child, and perhaps countless others to come, it had shifted just enough to make all the difference. The story of Keisha Morgan is more than just a tale of injustice and redemption. It's a stark reminder of how power, unchecked and wielded irresponsibly, can crush lives in an instant. But it's also proof that resilience, dignity, and courage to stand tall can turn even the darkest situations into opportunities for change. Keisha didn't just survive, she reclaimed her power. She faced systemic discrimination, personal humiliation, and financial devastation, yet never lost sight of her worth. Her journey teaches us that silence in the face of injustice only empowers the oppressor. Speaking up, even when the odds seem insurmountable, is the first step toward change. Raymond Bennett's role highlights another critical lesson. Privilege, when used responsibly, can be a force for good. He didn't just watch injustice unfold. He acted, using his resources to protect someone who had been unfairly targeted. His decision to hold Miranda accountable sent a clear message. Wealth and status don't exempt anyone from consequences, and Miranda, her fall from grace wasn't just punishment, it was a reckoning. It showed that entitlement without empathy leads to isolation. The world is shifting, and those who refuse to treat others with respect will find themselves left behind. But the most powerful takeaway is this: change doesn't start at the top. It starts with ordinary people refusing to accept mistreatment, with a single act of defiance, with someone like Keisha saying, "I deserve better." It's a reminder that dignity is non-negotiable, no matter who you are or where you come from. What about you? Have you ever faced a moment where standing up for yourself felt like risking everything? How did you handle it? Share your story in the comments below. And if you believe everyone deserves respect, no matter their job or background, hit like, subscribe, and share this video to spread the message. Thank you for watching, and may you always find the strength to stand tall, speak up, and claim the dignity you deserve. Take care and see you in the next story.